Friends, before we dive into this story of unimaginable betrayal, swift justice, and profound family pride, please take a moment. Leave a comment below telling us which city, which state you are watching from. We love hearing where our community gathers. And if you are ready for a story that will make your jaw drop, hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who needs a dose of karma. And most importantly, subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you even more fascinating tales. Trust me, you do not want to miss how this father made his spoiled son-in-law pay the ultimate price. The scene is set, characters and atmosphere, the air hung heavy with a mix of summer warmth and the imposing gravitas of wealth. The Cedarwood estate, home to the illustrious Harrington family, was not merely a house. It was a fortress of polished granite and towering glass, a modern marvel reflecting the dizzying height of the family's success in West Coast real estate. Today, it buzzed with activity, hosting the monthly family summit, a tradition less about lineage and more about preserving the dynasty built by patriarch Elias Harrington. Inside the expansive atrium, marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. The central hall was fragrant with the aroma of gourmet cuisine, tender cuts of prime rib, artisanal breads, and decadent desserts, all prepared by a famous Beverly Hills chef. Relatives, dressed in bespoke suits and high-fashion gowns, moved among the antique furniture, their laughter and conversations a soft, expensive hum. At the head table, seated in a custom-made leather chair, was Julian Thorne, son-in-law to Elias. Julian, a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his actual talent, picked at a perfectly seared Wagyu steak, his eyes darting around the room, always seeking approval. He wore a loud, designer velvet blazer and a watch that flashed obnoxiously under the warm light, trying desperately to blend in with the Harringtons. Julian's management role at Harrington Properties was an open secret, a golden parachute handed to him as a wedding gift. His overly confident, often patronizing demeanor usually made the old guard of the Harrington family cringe, but they remained silent, knowing their loyalty lay with Elias. Next to Julian, a seat remained conspicuously empty. It belonged to his wife, Serafina Harrington, Elias' only daughter. Julian showed no sign of impatience or concern for his wife's late arrival. He was too engrossed in a discussion with his cousin-in-law, letting out a jarring, loud laugh that seemed out of place in the elegant room. Outside the estate's towering iron gates, the clear California sky had darkened rapidly, threatening a sudden downpour. A modest, dark sedan from a rideshare service, an Uber, pulled up slowly along the curving gravel driveway. The back door opened, and out stepped Serafina. She was beautiful, but her eyes carried a fatigue that no amount of subtle makeup could hide. She fumbled with her purse, struggling to pay the driver in cash as the card reader was faulty. A light, cold drizzle began to speckle the hot asphalt. She quickly rushed toward the mansion, using her clutch bag as a makeshift shield to protect her pale green silk dress from the sudden rain. There was no personal chauffeur waiting, no umbrella raised in welcome. Serafina ran past the fleet of impeccably parked luxury cars, Ferraris, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces, gifts from her father to various family members over the years. When she finally reached the massive oak front door, she paused, slightly out of breath. She smoothed down her damp dress, wiped the scattered raindrops from her shoulders, and took a deep, centering breath. She was entering the lion's den, and she knew it. As Serafina entered the hall, a hush fell over the room. The conversations did not stop entirely, but they dimmed significantly as dozens of inquisitive eyes assessed her. Her simple but elegant appearance, worn with exhaustion, was a stark contrast to the aggressive opulence surrounding her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, a betrayal of the stress she was trying to mask with a fragile smile. She walked straight to her father, Elias Harrington, the powerful patriarch who presided over the head table. Elias observed his daughter with a gaze that was both sharp and deeply loving. He noticed the slight stains on her expensive shoes and the dampness along the hem of her dress. That cold knot of paternal worry immediately tightened in his chest. He saw the trouble his daughter always tried to conceal behind a veneer of composure. Elias slowly set down his silver fork. The metallic sound seemed to echo with unnatural clarity in the sudden silence. He looked at Serafina, who respectfully kissed his hand, and then his gaze shifted coldly to Julian, who continued to chew his food with blissful ignorance, not having bothered to stand up or pull out a chair for his wife. Elias cleared his throat, a soft sound, yet utterly commanding. All conversation at the table ceased instantly. With his deep, resonant baritone, a voice that could sway stock markets, he asked a simple question, a question that would swiftly and irrevocably change Julian Thorne's future. "Serafina, my darling," Elias began, his voice laced with feigned mild curiosity, "you are late and seem slightly distressed. Why did you arrive as if you took public transit? Did that new vehicle I acquired for your birthday, the Maybach S680, the special edition, I might add, did it perhaps suffer a malfunction? Did it leave you stranded, forcing you to use a rideshare in this unpredictable weather?" Serafina's lips trembled. She wanted to protect her husband, to offer a quick, convenient lie to spare him the embarrassment she felt in his presence. She was an obedient, loyal wife, even when her heart felt like glass. But before a single, carefully crafted word could leave Serafina's mouth, Julian, mouth half full of steak, interrupted. He leaned back in his chair with a casual, almost challenging air, utterly devoid of guilt or tact. "Oh, that car, father-in-law, that magnificent machine, it belongs to my mother now, Mrs. Veronica Thorne," Julian announced loudly, as if stating the most rational truth in the world. He spoke with a sickening, self-satisfied smirk. "Serafina, you see, only drives to the office, wears simple clothes, and honestly, she needs to practice modesty. Using a rideshare is far more practical for her, eliminates the fuss of finding parking, and it saves on gas. My mother, however, needs something substantial. She requires a large, luxurious vehicle so she won't be looked down upon by her peers at the Meadowbrook Country Club. She needs to represent her son's success appropriately." A profound silence descended upon the grand hall. Uncles and aunts exchanged horrified, disbelieving glances. They knew the Maybach was an extraordinarily personal, extravagant gift from Elias to his only daughter, meant to be her sanctuary and symbol of her status, not a trophy for Julian's vain, social climbing mother. Julian's words were not just disrespectful. They were an audacious declaration of ownership over his wife's assets and a total disregard for the giver of the gift. Serafina lowered her head, battling intense shame. Not shame for having taken an Uber, but shame that her husband was so proudly showcasing his utter lack of intelligence and decency in front of her father. She gripped the silk tablecloth, wishing desperately to disappear, her heart aching at how easily Julian prioritized his mother's image over his wife's comfort and safety. Elias Harrington's reaction was the opposite of what Julian expected. Elias did not slam the table. He did not shout. He didn't even flush with anger. He remained still for a long moment, observing Julian as if he were a specimen under a microscope. Then, a faint, chilling smile touched his lips, a smile that never reached the cold, hard blue of his eyes. He nodded slowly, as if Julian's twisted logic suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. With a perfectly neutral tone, Elias said, "I understand. Mrs. Thorne is now using the vehicle. Julian, I appreciate your honesty." Julian, misinterpreting his father-in-law's unsettling calmness as either reluctant approval or the helplessness of an older man facing a younger generation, flashed a smug, victorious grin. He felt he had masterfully navigated a confrontation and secured family assets for his own lineage. Beneath the linen-draped table, Elias Harrington's hand moved slowly to retrieve his private, custom-encrypted satellite phone. Without glancing at the screen, his fingers, which had signed billion-dollar deals, swiftly navigated to a secure family channel. He typed a concise, deadly command to his chief of security and head of corporate operations. A single, powerful sentence was all it took to initiate the extreme, prearranged asset recovery and personnel termination protocol. The message was sent in milliseconds, unleashing a devastating, targeted storm upon Julian and his mother. Elias replaced the phone, lifted his fine porcelain coffee cup, and took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the coffee as if he had just sealed the most profitable deal of the decade. His gaze settled gently on Serafina, sending her a silent, powerful promise. "It is handled, my dear. Father has control." Julian, completely oblivious to the digital hammer that had just fallen, continued to eat avidly, unaware that the sword of Damocles now hung directly over his meticulously coiffed head, ready to sever his ties to the world he believed he deserved. Meanwhile, in a contrasting corner of the city, miles away from the quiet, chilling precision of the Cedarwood estate, a scene of aggressive vanity was unfolding. This was the Platinum Galleria, the preferred meeting ground for the city's established elite and its most desperate social climbers. The cloudy sky did nothing to dampen Mrs. Veronica Thorne's triumphant mood. In the Galleria's valet drop-off zone, a space reserved for rapid entrances and exits, a magnificent obsidian-black Maybach S680 was parked, not neatly, but deliberately crooked, positioned perfectly to maximize visibility. Veronica stood next to the colossal luxury sedan, her chin tilted high, radiating an aura of borrowed status. She was dressed in an unfortunate collision of ill-fitting, brightly colored designer labels, an almost vulgar attempt to scream wealth. An imitation crocodile skin tote bag hung stiffly from her arm, and her fingers were overloaded with rings that caught the dull afternoon light with excessive, unnatural brilliance. Surrounding her were 5 members of her social circle from the Meadowbrook Country Club, a mix of old-money matrons and new-money arrivistes. Their expressions ranged from veiled admiration to thinly disguised envy, though a few, who knew the modest, somewhat questionable origins of the Thorne family wealth, exchanged subtle, knowing snickers. But today, Veronica held court. She intentionally raised her voice, ensuring every word of her performance carried across the polished stone lobby entrance. "Oh, yes, ladies, this dear thing is a special gift from my successful son, Julian. His business with Harrington Properties, is simply booming. Just last week, he insisted on upgrading my previous vehicle. Paid for this magnificent chariot, cash, of course, nearly $200,000 straight out of the reserve account. He said, 'Mother, you deserve to arrive with the prestige you command.' Such a sweet boy." She patted the vehicle's glossy hood with a proprietary air, boasting about the massaging, heated, and ventilated seats, the seamless integration of technology, and the custom, state-of-the-art Burmester 4D surround sound system. She made absolutely no mention of Serafina, her daughter-in-law, or, crucially, Elias Harrington, the true owner of the car. In Veronica's narrative, her son's success was entirely independent, a testament to her excellent mothering. Her friends, true to form, showered her with gushing, if hollow, praise. They extolled Julian as the model son, successful and deeply respectful of his mother's need for luxury. Veronica drank in the flattery like a thirsty desert traveler, her ego swelling to dangerous proportions. She even allowed herself a moment of petty cruelty, throwing a subtle, barbed remark at Mrs. Davies, a rival whose sedan was undeniably a few years older, suggesting it was time to prioritize safety and comfort, implying Mrs. Davies' vehicle lacked both. Finally satisfied after nearly 45 minutes of performance, a full half-hour past the point of polite conversation, Veronica decided to make her grand exit. She announced, with what she believed was an air of casual elegance, that she had an appointment at her preferred facialist and simply could not delay the glow. She pressed the key fob, the car unlocked with a soft, sophisticated chirp, and she slid herself into the cool, leather-scented sanctuary of the driver's seat. She straightened her back, attempting to look taller and more queenly, and gave a final, regal wave to her friends, who remained on the curb, observing her departure. With practiced confidence, Veronica pressed the start button on the dashboard. And that was where her dream, her stolen, temporary reality exploded into a nightmare. Instead of the smooth, quiet purr of the V12 engine, a long, piercing, and brutally loud alarm shrieked. The futuristic instrument panel, which moments ago displayed elegant, minimalist graphics, erupted into a violent, blinding red. All warning lights flashed simultaneously, creating an environment of terrifying panic in the confined, custom-stitched cabin. Before Veronica could comprehend the scale of the mechanical catastrophe, the car's advanced computer system began to speak. The automated voice, cold, metallic, and robotic, amplified through the very premium speakers she had just bragged about, delivered a clear and devastating verdict. Alert! Unauthorized use of an asset detected. Security system activated. Engine permanently locked by administrator. Alert! Unauthorized use of an asset detected. Security system activated. Engine permanently locked by administrator. The message repeated, looping relentlessly, deafeningly. Veronica panicked. She hammered the start button again and again, stomped frantically on the brake pedal, and beat the steering wheel with her heavily ringed palms. The car was utterly inert, an expensive, high-tech coffin. Her face went deathly pale, and a sudden, clammy sweat instantly ruined her thick foundation. The humiliation intensified exponentially when the vehicle's external security system activated the horn, sounding a deep, resonant, and constant anti-theft blast. The powerful sound reverberated throughout the high-domed Galleria lobby, drawing immediate and intense attention. Mall security guards, confused shoppers, rideshare drivers, and most cruelly, Veronica's entire social circle who hadn't yet left, all turned their attention to the stalled Maybach. Veronica's previously admiring audience now began to murmur and exchange whispers, fighting hard to suppress open laughter as they watched her trapped inside the massive car, looking like a manic fish in a highly polished glass bowl. She lunged for the door handle to escape the spotlight of shame, but the central locking system, remotely controlled, miles away, by Elias Harrington's IT team, had completely disabled the mechanism. She was a captive, a free, hysterically recorded sideshow for hundreds of eyes, right in the heart of the city's high society hub. At a secure, undisclosed operations center belonging to Harrington Properties, a young, impeccably dressed IT specialist watched his monitor with an expressionless face. He had just executed the emergency protocol command from the company's owner. On his console, the status for the Maybach with that specific license plate read, locked, user, unauthorized, status, recovery imminent. The employee typed the next, cruelly precise command, unlock doors after a 5-minute interval for maximum psychological impact. Simultaneously send current GPS location to asset recovery team, already staged in quadrant. In the Galleria lobby, those 5 minutes stretched into a personal eternity for Veronica. Through the thick, soundproof glass, she saw her friends take out their smartphones, not to call for help, but to capture the incident. She screamed for Romolo for help, but the high-end glass muffled her pleas. She wept, hysterically, and her heavy eye makeup began to run, turning into black, greasy streaks that ruined her face, obliterating the carefully constructed image of the high society matriarch. When the door locks finally released with a sharp, pneumatic click, Veronica did not immediately move. She was too physically and emotionally drained. But she was forced into action, because in the distance, cutting through the throng of onlookers, a massive, bright orange tow truck, bearing the imposing, unmistakable corporate logo of Harrington Enterprises Assets Recovery, was maneuvering into the drop-off zone. Stepping out of the truck were not scruffy, typical operators, but two powerfully built security agents. They were stern, professional, and dressed in sharp, black tactical uniforms. They moved with an unshakable determination, one carrying a formal plastic folder containing official seizure documents. They walked directly toward Veronica's car. It was in that moment, seeing the corporate branding and the agent's cold professionalism, that Veronica realized this was no random mechanical failure. This was a targeted, calculated counterattack, and she was standing on the front line of a corporate war zone with no defense left but her already shattered pride. The atmosphere in the Platinum Galleria lobby, usually a hive of sophisticated consumerism, had been completely transformed. It was now a stage for tension, public scandal, and dark comedy. The arrival of the gigantic orange tow truck, its emergency lights silently flashing, demanded immediate attention, parting the crowd of onlookers like a corporate Moses splitting the Red Sea. On the side of the towering vehicle, the corporate identity was stark and unforgiving. Harrington Enterprises Assets Recovery Division, a name synonymous with legal, unassailable power in the American business landscape. The two security agents who disembarked were far from typical tow operators. They wore flawless black uniforms, featuring the stylized, intimidating insignia of Harrington Enterprises embroidered crisply on their chests. Earpieces connected them to the centralized operations room. Their faces were impassive, cold, and utterly professional, their steps unwavering as they headed directly toward the stalled, $200,000 symbol of Veronica's ruined pride. Veronica was still in the car, struggling to regulate her breathing. The deeply tinted windows prevented her from clearly seeing the expressions of the gathering crowd, but she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes fixed upon her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a violent mix of sheer terror and the desperate residual pride she still clung to. One of the security agents rapped sharply on the driver's window, causing Veronica to jump. She tried to scream a demand that they leave her alone, but her voice was muffled by the thick glass. The agent wasted no time. He produced a small, sophisticated electronic device, a remote override unit, and held it briefly near the door handle. With a loud, decisive clack, the car lock yielded. The driver's door swung wide open, flooding the chilled cabin with the warmer lobby air and the immediate, intense murmur of the observing crowd. The security agent leaned in slightly, his voice devoid of any warmth or courtesy. "Ms. Thorne, you are required to exit the vehicle immediately. We are securing a company asset." Veronica, feeling every ounce of her stolen dignity being crushed underfoot, exploded in a burst of cornered fury. She clutched the steering wheel with a white-knuckled grip, refusing to budge. Her voice was shrill and cracking as she yelled that the car belonged to her son, Julian, and that these men were criminals and thieves, and she would call the police. Her hysterical screams bounced off the high ceiling of the lobby, causing the crowd to press even closer, eager to witness the unfolding drama. Multiple people raised their phones, hitting the record button, capturing the embarrassing spectacle for real-time social media consumption. The agent remained perfectly composed, immune to her melodrama. With deliberate calm, he pulled out his plastic folder and extracted the official documents. He held the stamped, signed asset recovery order up, his voice loud enough for the immediate front row of spectators to hear. "This vehicle is registered as an operating asset of the Harrington Enterprises conglomerate, under the ownership of Mr. Elias Harrington. It is currently being utilized without written authorization by a non-employee. We are executing a legal recovery." The words "company asset" and "misused" resonated sickeningly in the ears of Veronica's friends, who stood frozen on the sidewalk. Their expressions shifted from confusion and schadenfreude to pure contempt. The rumor began to spread instantly. The expensive luxury car Veronica had flaunted so aggressively was not the fruit of her son's booming success, but a corporate vehicle, effectively her daughter-in-law's father's property. As Veronica continued her desperate, physical resistance, refusing to release the steering wheel, the security agents initiated the final, professional protocol. One agent signaled the other, with trained agility and strength, but careful to avoid physical injury that could complicate legal matters. They efficiently pried Veronica's hands from the leather wheel. Veronica thrashed like a petulant child, her feet kicking wildly, but the meager strength of a woman who prioritized luxury over exercise was no match for two highly trained professional security guards. In a matter of seconds, Veronica was efficiently, if not gently, extracted from the car. She stumbled and would have fallen dramatically onto the polished asphalt had she not instinctively grabbed a nearby marble pillar for balance. Her imitation crocodile skin purse slipped from her grasp, its entire contents scattering across the floor. Cheap, brightly colored lipstick, crumpled tissues, and a bulging, thin wallet containing not cash, but only old receipts and loyalty cards. The next sequence delivered the ultimate, crushing blow of humiliation. The tow truck operator, having waited patiently, swiftly secured the front bumper of the Maybach. The powerful towing machinery whirred to life, gently lifting the massive car onto the truck bed. Veronica watched, eyes wide with horror. She ran toward the truck, beating on its side, screaming Julian's name, begging them not to take the car, as if her son's name were a magical incantation that could stop the forces of corporate retribution. But no hero arrived. The truck slowly pulled away, taking with it the very last shred of the social status Veronica had fought so hard and so dishonestly to acquire. She was left standing alone in the middle of the drop-off zone. Her once elaborate hairstyle was now a sweaty, disheveled mess, and the running mascara gave her a truly ghastly, almost comical appearance in the harsh afternoon light. No one rushed to her aid. The onlookers were too busy confirming the details and uploading videos of the incident to local gossip accounts. One of Veronica's friends, a woman with a famously sharp tongue whom Veronica had subtly insulted earlier, approached her. She did not offer a hand or a kind word. Instead, she leaned in close and delivered the final, cutting line, her voice a low, lethal whisper. "It seems your son's company car had a sudden business emergency, Veronica. Why don't you call an Uber? Or perhaps, as Julian suggested, you need to learn to be more modest." Veronica looked around, her eyes glazed over, her world built on lies and borrowed status rapidly disintegrating. A nearby shopper's phone chimed with a notification, a video of Ms. Thorne being forcibly removed by security guards, captioned with "High Society Flex turns out to be in-law's company repo," had just hit the city's top gossip channel and was already racking up thousands of views. Back at the Cedarwood estate, the mood remained serenely untouched. A live string quartet played a sophisticated piece in the background as the guests leisurely enjoyed their desserts. Serafina sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the empty plate before her, trying hard to filter out the sound of Julian chewing beside her, still avid, still oblivious. He looked completely relaxed, occasionally letting out a small, uncovered burp, feeling utterly secure and victorious, having successfully diffused his father-in-law's question without any consequence, or so he thought. He had no idea the silence in the room was the heavy, suffocating calm before the final, devastating storm. Suddenly, Julian's expensive smartphone, lying innocently on the polished teak table, vibrated violently. It emitted a jarring, loud ringtone, a sound completely out of place in the refined, quiet elegance of the dining hall. The disruptive noise shattered the fragile serenity of the room, causing several uncles and aunts to turn with annoyed, sharp expressions. Julian snatched the phone quickly, seeing the caller ID. "Mom!" He smiled broadly, a triumphant, self-satisfied grin. He assumed his mother was calling to gush about the car, to thank him again for the status it conferred, or perhaps just to brag that she was now enjoying her facial treatment. Confidently, Julian answered the call without bothering to excuse himself or move away from the table, ensuring that everyone nearby could hear his side of the conversation. "Yes, Mother, everything all right? Having a fabulous time?" he asked, his tone radiating smugness. But the smile evaporated from Julian's face in an instant, replaced first by confusion, then by a rapidly draining color. The voice screaming from the other end was not one of gratitude or calm enjoyment. It was a high-pitched, hysterical wail, mixed with deep, inconsolable sobbing. "Mrs." Veronica Thorne's voice was so piercing and frantic that even Serafina, sitting stone-faced beside him, could clearly hear the faint, muffled panic emanating from the receiver. Julian's face cycled through shades of crimson and then stark white. He listened in stunned silence as his mother delivered a breathless, chaotic account. The car had been forcibly seized and towed away by brutal thugs. She had been treated like a criminal, humiliated in front of all her important friends, and was now utterly stranded on the street, likely near a bus stop in the gathering rain. Julian's narrow, entitled mind immediately jumped to a false, convenient conclusion. This had to be Serafina's doing. She must have been hurt by his public dismissal of her needs and had secretly phoned the authorities, or maybe canceled the car's registration and insurance in petty revenge. Rage, sudden and explosive, consumed him. He slammed his silver spoon onto the porcelain plate with a deafening clatter. The entire, previously serene room went silent instantly, every eye snapping toward the disruptive source. Julian sprang to his feet. His heavy chair scraped violently against the marble floor with a screech that seemed to rake across everyone's nerves. With eyes bulging and neck veins starting to strain, Julian pointed a rigid, accusatory finger directly at Serafina's face. Serafina remained seated, silent, watching him. "What did you do, Azaza?" He screamed, completely forgetting the room full of high-powered relatives. "You ungrateful, spiteful excuse for a wife. You're jealous, aren't you? You couldn't stand seeing my mother enjoy a little luxury. What did you do to have that car towed? Did you call the police? Did you cancel the insurance, you little?" Julian's face was contorted, ready to spew a torrent of baseless accusations and vicious insults. Serafina finally raised her head. She looked at her husband with an utterly unreadable expression, a complex blend of pity for his stupidity and bone-deep, weary exhaustion. But before Serafina could utter a single word in defense, a deep, resonant baritone voice cut through Julian's blinding, childish fury, silencing him instantly, like a hot knife slicing through soft butter. Elias Harrington had risen from his seat at the head of the table. His movements were slow, deliberate, and imbued with an inescapable, paralyzing authority that commanded total silence. He did not shout. He did not slam the table. He simply raised one hand slightly, a subtle, almost dismissive gesture that nonetheless forced Julian's raging mouth to clamp shut. Julian, consumed by adrenaline, found himself instinctively obeying, his jaw slack, his face frozen in a mixture of anger and confusion. Elias walked slowly around the table, his steps firm and powerful against the marble. He stopped precisely 2 paces away from his son-in-law, a distance that felt immense, and locked eyes with him. Elias possessed a gaze that was sharp, piercing, and cold, the unflinching look of a tycoon who had destroyed numerous competitors and held entire livelihoods in his hands. With a tone that was perfectly neutral, even detached, Elias spoke. "The issue is not with the vehicle, Julian. The Maybach has been recovered because its rightful owner, Harrington Enterprises, determined that the current user was not qualified, nor was the asset being utilized for its intended corporate purpose." Julian stammered, his mind reeling, desperately trying to process the meaning of his father-in-law's utterly calm words. Elias continued, his tone dropping further, becoming deadly cold. "Since I heard your mother needs a ride, I suggest you tend to her immediately. She is currently, according to your phone call, suffering through a bit of heat and rain on the side of a busy street." Julian, utterly bewildered and panicked by the thought of his mother's suffering and the imminent threat of public exposure, tried weakly to offer an excuse. "But, father-in-law, I have an important late-night report to finish for the office. I need to get back to the—" Elias interrupted him again, this time with a dangerous, surgical calm. He introduced Julian to a completely new reality. "The car you drove here, Julian," Elias said, his gaze unwavering. "The customized Cadillac CT6, the black one you rely on for your corporate travel." Julian reflexively clutched his pants pocket, guarding the keys, a tremor starting in his hands. Elias sketched a faint, terrifying smile. "That vehicle, my dear boy, is an employee benefit. And as of 5:00 p.m. this afternoon, precisely when I sent that text, your name was removed from the Harrington Enterprises payroll and employee roster. The cause was termination for serious ethical violations and gross misuse of company assets." The news of the firing, of his complete and total professional decapitation, was delivered with the same casual air Elias might use to discuss the fluctuating price of real estate. The color instantly drained from Julian's face. His legs went weak, suddenly unable to support the weight of his expensive blazer and crushing ego. He glanced desperately around the table, seeking a sympathetic face, an uncle, an aunt, anyone who might offer support. But they all met his look with expressions of cold contempt or profound indifference. No one felt pity. His behavior had earned him this. Elias extended his open hand, demanding the keys to the Cadillac. With hands trembling so violently he could barely manage the simple task, Julian fumbled in his pocket and dropped the heavy fob into his father-in-law's palm. It felt as if he were handing over not just a car, but his entire comfortable life. Without the job and the company car, he was nothing more than a parasite with a large credit card bill. But the final, excruciating humiliation was yet to come. Elias pulled a crisp $50 bill from his jacket pocket. He carefully folded the bill in half and tucked it slowly, deliberately, into the breast pocket of Julian's expensive, silk designer shirt. Elias patted the pocket lightly, then leaned in, whispering the final, devastating line, loud enough for every relative sitting nearby to hear clearly. "That money, Julian, is for a standard cab fare. A luxury Uber is far too expensive now, and as you wisely stated earlier regarding my daughter, you must learn to practice modesty and save your money. It's the practical, convenient choice." Elias then nodded once to the head of estate security, a large, formidable man waiting quietly near the entrance. 2 robust house guards immediately approached, flanking Julian. They did not touch him roughly. They simply stood on either side, exerting immense psychological pressure that mandated his immediate, silent departure. Julian looked one last, desperate time at Serafina, hoping, praying his wife would leap to his defense, beg her father for mercy, or at least show some sign of distress. But Serafina did not look up. She was busy pouring a fresh cup of hot, herbal tea for her mother, her expression utterly composed. She acted as if Julian were no longer a material presence in the room, as if he had been reduced to a nonentity, a stain that was already fading from the mahogany table. With a faltering step and his pride utterly shattered, Julian Thorne was exiled from the magnificent dining room, walking past the delicious food he had not finished, toward the main exit. Behind him, the family conversation slowly, naturally resumed, as if a minor piece of trash that had been briefly obstructing the view had simply been cleared away and forgotten. When Julian Thorne stepped out of the magnificent front door of the Cedarwood estate, every heavy, agonizing step he took was a cocktail of explosive, humiliating rage and a chilling, heartbreaking shame. The 2 massive, unsmiling security guards continued their relentless escort, walking him past the manicured flower beds and the perfect gravel drive, all the way to the towering wrought-iron main gate. They said nothing, but their presence was a scream, a declaration that Julian was now nothing more than refused to be immediately purged from the luxurious property. The automatic gate closed slowly behind him with a deep, heavy metallic thud. The sound was final, a loud, undeniable declaration that the door to his life of comfort, status, and entitlement had been violently slammed shut forever. He stood momentarily stunned on the sidewalk outside the private residential community, looking back at the imposing, warm glow of the mansion, the place where he should have been enjoying the remainder of the evening as a respected son-in-law, not as a publicly fired, banished fool. The sky, which had only threatened earlier, finally unleashed its contents. It was not a gentle shower, but a cold, aggressive, intense downpour. It was as if the very weather was conspiring with the universe to complete Julian's humiliation. He instinctively sought meager shelter under a sprawling oak tree near the curb, but its leaves were far too sparse to offer any real protection from the relentless assault of the water. In moments, his expensive silk designer shirt, the one he had charged to Serafina's supplementary credit card, was soaked and clinging miserably to his skin. Desperate, he fumbled in his pants pocket and pulled out his premium smartphone. Its screen was instantly smeared and partially wet from the falling rain. With trembling fingers that betrayed his rising panic, he opened the rideshare application. He had to get out of there, and fast, before any neighbor, acquaintance, or business rival of his father-in-law saw him standing on the street like a common vagrant. But a familiar, and now insurmountable, problem arose. The hyper-exclusive gated community where Elias Harrington resided had ironclad security rules. The application on Julian's phone flashed a crushing notification. Service restricted. No access permit for driver entry into this private residential zone without authorization from the property owner. Please proceed to the main gate for pickup. Julian frantically tried calling the security booth at the main entrance, hoping to plead with a guard to override the barrier for a rideshare driver, but his call was instantly sent to a disconnected tone. His number had clearly been blocked, flagged, and marked to be ignored by the estate's private security detail. He had no alternative. Julian had to walk the considerable distance to the community's main entrance, a torturous 1.5 miles from where he stood. A distance he normally covered in 3 minutes in an air-conditioned, company-leased luxury sedan, now stretched out before him like a path of utter torment. He began to walk with heavy, defeated steps. His gleaming, Italian leather dress shoes immediately submerged into the dirty puddles collecting on the asphalt. Every squelching step was a blow to his already shattered ego. The rain intensified, and a strong, cold wind began to howl, making the tall palms sway violently. In less than 5 minutes, Julian was completely, miserably drenched. His carefully sculpted, gelled hair hung limp over his forehead, and water streamed down his face, masking the tears of pure, furious rage that were beginning to well up in his eyes. He cursed Serafina in his mind. He cursed Elias Harrington. He felt profoundly and unfairly victimized. In his distorted, self-centered logic, he believed he had a right to enjoy those comforts, and his father-in-law's anger over a simple car was excessive, disproportionate, and tyrannical. He remained entirely blind to the actual offense, his accumulated years of blatant entitlement and audacious disrespect. As Julian stumbled onward through the downpour, blinded by the rain and self-pity, a pair of intensely bright, powerful car headlights suddenly illuminated his back. Julian jerked reflexively toward the edge of the curb, hoping it was merely a passing neighbor. But the car slowed purposefully as it approached him. It was a vast, pearl-white SUV, the exact kind of ultra-luxury vehicle, specifically a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, that had been the subject of his mother's boastful humiliation that afternoon. Only this one was absolutely pristine and brand new. The temporary dealership license plate gleamed. Julian turned, his heart leaping with a flicker of foolish, desperate hope. Perhaps Elias had experienced a last-minute change of heart and sent his chauffeur to take him to the main gate. The car's windows were flawlessly clear, treated with the highest-grade water-repellent coating, allowing Julian a perfectly clear view of the occupants inside. Behind the wheel sat Elias Harrington. The powerful patriarch was driving leisurely, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, his face utterly serene, completely dry, and enjoying the faint, sophisticated strains of classical music audible even over the rain. And next to him sat Serafina. His wife had changed out of her damp silk dress and was now wearing comfortable, warm, dry clothes. She was holding a thermos cup, presumably containing a hot drink. Her expression was completely peaceful, composed, and utterly unbothered. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl as the massive SUV drove deliberately and slowly past Julian's shivering form. Julian stared at his wife's face, willing her to turn, to see her husband shivering, soaked, and humiliated, and to beg her father to stop the car. But that hope was utterly annihilated. Serafina looked straight ahead, through the pristine windshield, her gaze utterly empty. Julian Thorne, the man who had been her husband moments earlier, was simply an uninteresting object on the side of the road to her now, no more significant than a broken streetlight or a forgotten trash can. There was no hatred in her eyes, only an absolute, paralyzing indifference. The Rolls-Royce accelerated again. Its massive tires passed through a deep puddle near the curb, sending a violent, brown spray of muddy water arching over Julian, drenching his already saturated pants in cold, dirty grime. Julian stood there, soaked in mud and rainwater, watching stunned as the crimson taillights of the luxury vehicle smoothly rounded the corner and disappeared toward the exit gate. He was left entirely alone, experiencing a cold that went beyond his skin, chilling him to the very core of his soul. An hour later, Romolo finally reached the upscale rental apartment he still called home, though the significant rent and all the utility bills were paid exclusively by Serafina. His body was shaking violently, his lips tinged blue with cold. He slammed the apartment door shut as he entered, desperate for warmth and a place to unleash his emotions. But the scene that greeted him in the living room only guaranteed an even bigger, more immediate headache. The apartment was a chaotic mess. Curled up tightly on the expensive Italian leather sofa was Ms. Veronica Thorne. Her elaborate hair was completely disheveled, and the black, running streaks of mascara still stained her cheeks. His mother was also thoroughly soaked and clearly in shock. Apparently, she had endured similar difficulties trying to secure decent transportation from the Platinum Galleria after her public ordeal. Seeing Julian arrive home in an equally pitiful, dripping state, Ms. Corrine, instead of asking if he was hurt or offering him a towel, immediately shot to her feet and unleashed her pent-up fury. She pointed a frantic, accusing finger directly at Julian's face, screaming where his responsibility as a son lay. Veronica hysterically recounted the tragedy at the mall, wildly exaggerating how she had been treated like a criminal and made the laughing stock of the city's high society. She viciously blamed Julian for his fundamental failure, for not controlling his wife, accusing him of being too soft on Serafina, which, she insisted, had given the daughter-in-law the confidence to commit the disrespectful, retaliatory act of recovering the company car. Veronica's high-pitched, relentless screams filled the relatively small apartment, making Julian's ears ring with a painful intensity. Physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted, Julian finally broke. For the first time in his sheltered, entitled life, he responded not with his usual petulance, but with his own raw, unmanaged rage. Julian Thorne, shaking with a feverish chill, took 2 steps back from his mother, his own eyes now blazing with a raw, desperate fury that eclipsed his mother's familiar, dramatic rage. Control her, mother." Julian roared, his voice hoarse from the cold and the sheer shock of his situation. He had endured a day of public humiliation, followed by total professional ruin, and now the man who had caused it all, Elias Harrington, had driven past him in a climate-controlled Rolls-Royce with his indifferent wife beside him, splashing mud onto his clothes. He had nothing left to lose. "You think this was Serafina? You think that passive little mouse has the guts to touch anything Elias Harrington owns? He did this, mother. He fired me. He stripped me of the company car, the job, the title, and the entire future you've been boasting about for 2 years." Veronica Thorne staggered back, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. The raw, violent honesty of his scream finally penetrated her self-centered shock. "Fired? What do you mean fired?" she whispered, the high-pitched hysteria replaced by a sudden, chilling dread. "Julian, the job was safe. It was your father-in-law's company. You're his son-in-law. He can't just... He can." Julian threw his soaked velvet jacket onto the floor where it landed with a wet, pathetic thud. He did it right there in front of everyone, in front of the cousins and aunts. He gave me $50 for a taxi and had me escorted out like a thief. He did it, mother, because of you. Because I gave you the car. Because I stood up and bragged about your need to impress your silly country club friends. He took everything because I dared to disrespect his gift to his daughter. We are collateral damage in his corporate game. Julian started pacing frantically, rubbing his hands together in a useless attempt to generate warmth. Serafina didn't even look at me. She just sat there, dry and warm, letting her father destroy my life. And then she drove right past me in a brand new, massive SUV, splashing me with mud. Veronica sank back onto the sofa, the realization of the disaster finally crashing down. The car was not the issue. The job was not the issue. The issue was Elias Harrington's terrifying, ruthless response to disrespect. Julian, her successful son, had been humiliated and destroyed, and she was the reason. "Oh, Julian, my God," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "What do we do? What about our reputation? What about the rent for this place? What about your credit card bills?" Julian stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes cold and accusing. "My credit card bills? The one Serafina pays? Mother, Serafina pays for this entire apartment. She pays the utilities. She pays for my insurance, my designer clothes, everything. I haven't had a real paycheck since I started there. It was all an allowance disguised as a salary. I have no savings, Mother. I am a broke, unemployed 29-year-old with zero marketable skills outside of playing golf with clients." The revelation hung in the air. Julian Thorne was not a tycoon's rising star. He was a very expensive, pampered liability. Veronica Thorne's panic sharpened into a cold, immediate practicality. "Then we must call her. You must beg her. Julian, she's your wife. She may be aloof, but she's not heartless. She loves you. She wouldn't let her father completely ruin you. You must make her understand that you had to protect my honor." Julian retrieved his phone, his hand still shaking. He hesitated. He knew Serafina. She did not respond to begging or dramatics. He scrolled past her number and instead dialed his own father, Arthur Thorne, a man of modest means who ran a small, struggling landscaping business an hour outside the city. Arthur, sounding exhausted, answered on the second ring. Julian launched into a frantic, self-pitying explanation, detailing the car seizure and the firing, omitting only his own arrogance. Arthur listened patiently, his silence heavy. When Julian finished, there was a long pause. "Julian," his father finally said, his voice flat, "the car was a gift to Serafina. Her father is a billionaire, you are an executive in his company. You took a gift meant for his only daughter and gave it to your mother to show off at a country club. You did this in front of the man who signs your paychecks. But father, the disrespect, the humiliation," Julian pleaded. "No, son, the disrespect was yours. Elias didn't fire you for stealing a car. He fired you for confirming you had no respect for his family, his assets, or his daughter. You put your mother's vanity above your wife's needs. He showed you that the difference between his wealth and yours is that he earns his, and you only spend it. I can't help you, Julian. I own 3 lawnmowers and a broken pickup truck. I certainly can't afford to pay your rent or call Elias Harrington. You made your bed with that family, and you chose to ruin it with your ego. You need to call Serafina." The line clicked dead. Julian stared at the phone, his face a perfect picture of defeat. His mother watched him, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "He said no," Julian mumbled. "He said it was my fault. He said I have to call Serafina." Gathering the last remnants of his courage, and fueled by the necessity of his financial survival, Julian finally dialed his wife's number. Meanwhile, back at the Cedarwood estate, the mood had lifted completely. The string quartet had started playing a lively Vivaldi concerto. Elias, serene and utterly unconcerned with the storm he had unleashed, was discussing international market trends with his brother-in-law. Serafina was seated next to her mother, Mrs. Evelyn Harrington, sipping the hot tea she had poured. Her phone, which she had placed face down on the silk tablecloth, vibrated gently with Julian's incoming call. Serafina ignored it. It vibrated again, and again. Julian called 4 times in rapid succession. Evelyn, Serafina's mother, a woman of great grace but fierce loyalty, looked at her daughter. "Serafina, darling, you should probably answer. He's clearly in distress." Serafina took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her gaze tranquil. "Mother," she said softly, "Julian has always been perfectly capable of handling his own distress. He is a grown man. If he needed to speak to me, he would have done so earlier in person, before embarrassing me and insulting father." She flipped the phone over, revealing Julian's rapidly accumulating missed calls. She then performed a simple, decisive action. She opened her settings and blocked his number, not just for calls, but for all messaging platforms. It was a digital severance, quiet and irreversible. Elias, who had been listening to the exchange with the quiet focus of a hawk, smiled, a real, genuine, paternal smile this time. "Good girl, Serafina. Control your own peace. Now, about that new Cullinan, did the sound system meet your expectations? We can always adjust the acoustics." Serafina returned the smile. "The acoustics are perfect, Father, and the ride is very smooth. It feels safe." Just as they finished their exchange, a loud notification pinged on Elia's encrypted phone. It was the head of operations. "Asset recovery complete. Cadillac CT-6 secured. Asset disposal protocol initiated. All Thorne family corporate access points terminated. Final step pending. Marital status." Elias nodded, acknowledging the professionalism of his team. He looked at Serafina, who was now engaged in a calm discussion with her mother about a charity event. It was time for the last step. The removal of Julian Thorne had been a necessary corporate cleanup, but Serafina's happiness was the true bottom line. Elias raised his voice slightly, allowing it to carry across the main table, addressing his wife and daughter. "Ladies, I apologize for the unpleasant interruption earlier. We've discussed the misuse of company assets. Now let's discuss the misuse of my daughter's heart and time." He paused, ensuring every Harrington at the table was listening intently. "Serafina," Elias said, his voice now gentle but firm. "The Maybach was a property decision. This next decision is purely for your happiness. Julian Thorne has been professionally terminated. Do you wish to proceed with the legal termination of your marital contract?" The table held its breath. All eyes were on Serafina. Julian had depended on her loyalty and obedience for his entire comfortable existence. Now, in the light of her father's protection, she had the freedom to decide. Serafina gently set down her teacup. She looked at her father, then around the room at her family, and finally she looked at the empty chair beside her, a chair Julian had abandoned to prioritize his ego. "Father," she said, her voice clear and steady, devoid of any weakness or second-guessing. "I believe I should get what's due to me. I need to recover the assets I lost during this relationship, assets he misused just as he misused the car. I want him removed from my apartment, I want my credit cards back, and I want a divorce. And I want to sign the papers as soon as possible." Her decision was met not with gasps of shock, but with a quiet, approving murmur from the gathered Harringtons. Elias Harrington looked upon his daughter with immense pride. She was finally reclaiming her power. The silence that followed Serafina's declaration was powerful, not of shock, but of shared, knowing approval. Elias Harrington looked at his daughter, his eyes shining with the pride of a man who had raised a queen, not just an heiress. The decision was surgical, clean, and entirely her own. "Excellent," Elias stated, his voice ringing with finality. He turned to his chief legal counsel, Mr. Alastair Vance, a lean, silver-haired man who had been silently observing the entire exchange from a nearby chair. "Alastair, prepare the paperwork tonight. Expedited filing. We will ensure Serafina recovers every misused asset, both tangible and intangible. Julian Thorne will receive a single, certified letter outlining the terms of the termination and the divorce proceedings, effective immediately." Elias then looked back at his daughter, his expression softening. "Serafina, you deserve an entirely fresh start. The apartment he is currently occupying is in your name, on my property portfolio. I suggest you change the locks immediately and send a moving crew in the morning. All of his belongings, and his mother's, if she is still present, must be placed on the curb by 10 a.m. sharp." This was not merely a divorce. It was a total, corporate-level deconstruction of Julian's entire existence. Meanwhile, back at the small, upscale rental apartment, Julian was still shaking, but now his fury had turned into a desperate, cold fear. He was dialing Serafina's number again, praying the blockage was a glitch, while Veronica continued to lament their sudden, catastrophic financial exposure. "Julian, try the security team at the gate. They must know. They must have seen him drive out." Veronica insisted, wringing her hands, her voice now a frantic squeak. Julian ignored her, pressing the phone to his ear, listening to the agonizing sound of the line ringing endlessly. "She blocked me, Mother. She blocked the number. She's doing this to me." Just then, his phone vibrated with an unfamiliar notification. It was a digital communication from Harrington Enterprises, not an email, but a secure document transfer protocol that instantly disabled his current phone and rerouted all future communications to a certified legal service. Julian stared at the screen as the entire interface went blank, replaced by a single, stark message in bold red lettering: "Access revoked. See attached certified legal notice for termination and asset recovery protocol." He accessed the attached file with trembling fingers. It was a concise, brutal letter on Harrington Properties' letterhead. It confirmed his immediate termination for cause, citing ethical violations, and the theft misuse of the Maybach. But the next paragraph hit him like a physical blow. "Furthermore, please be advised that Mrs. Serafina Harrington Thorne has initiated divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences. As the primary leaseholder and owner of all furnishings within the property located at 410 Bayview Crescent, Mrs. Thorne requires your immediate vacation of the premises. All personal effects, including those of Ms. Veronica Thorne, must be removed by 10:00 a.m. tomorrow, Friday. Failure to comply will result in the immediate removal of all persons and property by professional recovery services." Attached to this notice was a secondary document, a comprehensive summary of every financial asset tied to him, all of which were, in fact, Serafina's assets. This included the cancellation of his supplementary credit cards, the freezing of the joint checking account, which was entirely funded by Serafina, and a detailed breakdown of all luxury items Elias had gifted him, which were now being legally demanded back as compensation for the loss of company time and misuse of resources. Julian's face crumpled. He was not just fired, he was financially sterilized. Veronica, peering over his shoulder, let out a piercing shriek as she read the letter. 10 a.m., the curb. Julian, where will we go? What about my clothes? What about my jewelry? You have to call a lawyer. A lawyer, Mother, with what money? Julian threw the now useless phone onto the couch. He took everything. He took the job, the car, the credit cards, all of it. He gave me $50 for a cab, and that's probably all the liquid cash I have in the world that isn't traceable to his bank account. The irony was crushing. Julian, who had sneered at his wife for taking a rideshare, now couldn't even afford a proper cab out of the city. Julian suddenly remembered the Cadillac CT6, his company car, the one Elias had confiscated. He had a glimmer of hope. Perhaps he could retrieve his golf clubs and some personal valuables from the trunk before it was officially processed. "The Cadillac," he gasped. "It has to be parked at the estate. I have to go back and get my things before they auction it off." "Are you insane, Julian? You think he'll let you back through the gate?" Veronica demanded, frantic. "I have to try. I'll sneak in. I'll walk around the perimeter. I have to recover something." Julian grabbed his keys, the apartment keys, the only keys he now possessed. Back at the Cedarwood estate, the dinner was winding down. Serafina was enjoying a glass of fine champagne, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The toxic weight of Julian's presence had been lifted. Elias approached his daughter. "Serafina," he said quietly, "we have initiated the protocol, but I want you to know the full extent of this. I didn't just fire him and take the assets. I have instructed my HR department to ensure that the termination reason is carefully documented and made available to a few key contacts in the city's executive search firms. Julian will never secure another executive-level position in this city. He will be unhireable." Serafina looked at her father. She had always known he was powerful, but this level of calculated, surgical destruction was chillingly impressive. "Thank you, Father. That is thorough. A lesson must be complete, my dear. He needs to understand that using a Harrington for status comes with absolute and irreversible consequences. He took your comfort, I took his career." Just then, a flash of red light from the security camera feed visible on a small monitor Elias kept discreetly near the dessert bar, caught his eye. The security chief, who had re-entered the room, approached Elias and spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "Sir, perimeter security just detected a thermal signature anomaly near the west wall, close to where the confiscated Cadillac is currently stored. It appears to be Mr. Thorne. He's trying to climb the fence." Elias Harrington's eyes narrowed into slits of cold amusement. Is he now? The man has truly learned nothing. He still believes he can sneak in and steal assets that no longer belong to him. He paused, a brilliant, final idea forming in his mind, a dramatic flourish to close the book on Julian Thorne forever. "Do not apprehend him, security chief," Elias instructed, a dangerous smile spreading across his lips. "Let him reach the car. Let him get right to the driver's side door. Then ensure the entire scene is captured on video. I want a clean, high-resolution recording of what happens next. This will be the final lesson." Elias turned to Serafina. "It seems your husband is attempting one final, desperate breach of the peace. Would you care to deliver the final message, my dear?" Serafina, holding her champagne flute, felt a surge of cold, focused resolve. The man who had humiliated her and dismissed her worth was about to learn that he was truly powerless. "Yes, father, I think I would." Back at the secluded western perimeter of the Cedarwood estate, Julian, soaking wet and covered in mud, finally finished scaling the 12-foot wrought iron fence. He dropped silently onto the soft grass, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He was inside. He crept across the expansive lawn until he saw it. The black Cadillac CT6, parked neatly in the isolated corporate parking area reserved for seized assets, visible under the security floodlights. He stumbled toward the driver's door, pulling the apartment keys from his pocket, the keys that until yesterday had also operated this vehicle. He jammed the key into the lock, his hands clumsy with adrenaline. The key turned. The door swung open with a soft, expensive click. Julian scrambled inside the cool, familiar cabin, breathing a sigh of relief. He was safe. He was in. Now to grab his golf bag from the trunk and perhaps the laptop from the back seat. But before he could even reach the trunk release button, a powerful, chilling sound emanated from the dashboard, the same metallic, robotic female voice that had humiliated his mother earlier. This time, the voice was directed solely at him, and it was amplified to a deafening volume inside the car. "Intruder alert. Unauthorized former user detected. Asset recovery protocol, Phase 3 activated." The metallic, robotic voice, amplified to a shattering volume within the confined space of the Cadillac, instantly paralyzed Julian Thorne. "Intruder alert. Unauthorized former user detected. Asset recovery protocol, Phase 3 activated." Julian gasped, staring wildly at the dashboard, which, like the Maybach, had erupted in a terrifying, pulsating red light. He frantically grabbed the door handle, desperate to escape the auditory assault, but the advanced central locking system, again controlled remotely, had slammed shut with a solid, final thunk. He was trapped again, this time in his own, now confiscated company car, yards away from the imposing mansion. Suddenly, the voice switched from the impersonal, technical alert to a specific, intimate message, a new, chilling layer of the security system's capability. "Julian Thorne, please cease all activity. You are trespassing on private property and interfering with secured company assets. This breach is being recorded. Your wife, Mrs. Serafina Harrington Thorne, has a final message for you." A heartbeat later, the robotic voice ceased, replaced by a live audio feed. Serafina's voice, delivered through the car's premium audio system, was icy, calm, and devastatingly clear, a terrifying contrast to the chaotic fear consuming Julian. "Hello, Julian," Serafina's voice began, smooth as polished ice. "You always believed that the measure of a man was the car he drove. You felt that because I drove simply, I should live modestly, and you deserved the best. You always underestimated me, Julian. You always underestimated my father." Julian pounded his fist on the door, screaming incoherently, but his voice was drowned out by the internal speaker volume, and outside, the soundproof windows ensured his panic remained his private shame. "You came back to recover your golf clubs and laptop," Serafina continued, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "Valuable items, I'm sure, but you forgot the most valuable asset you ever had, my loyalty. You threw that away for your mother's vanity and your own petty arrogance. Now you are getting the true definition of modesty and simplicity. They start right now." She paused, and Julian could hear the faint, muffled sound of his father-in-law, Elias, speaking briefly in the background, likely confirming the next step. "Julian," Serafina's voice returned, sharper now. "Your employment termination, your financial severance, and your marital termination are all finalized. The documents were certified moments ago. The key you used to enter this car has just been digitally deactivated forever. You have zero connection to Harrington Enterprises, the Harrington family, or its assets. This vehicle is being immediately transported to the corporate disposal lot." Then came the final, brutal twist. "You mentioned earlier that using an Uber was practical and convenient for me, Julian. I agree. It is practical and convenient. Therefore, Father and I have just initiated the last protocol for you." Suddenly, the car's high-tech environmental control system switched on. The customized heating unit, designed to warm the cabin rapidly in cold weather, reversed violently. The air conditioning unit blasted a torrent of air, instantly dropping the internal temperature to below freezing. The chilling effect was immediate, biting through Julian's already soaked clothing. Simultaneously, the advanced dynamic massage seats, which Julian had often bragged about, switched on and began a vigorous, aggressive program. The powerful mechanisms in the seat back and base activated, creating a violent, relentless pounding sensation that was less therapeutic and more physically punitive, shaking his body violently against the leather upholstery. The relentless vibrations and the freezing cold air trapped Julian in a miserable, physically uncomfortable cage. "Enjoy the ride, Julian," Serafina finished, her voice utterly cold. "Think of this as your practical, convenient, first-class trip to the main gate. The disposal crew will unlatch the doors upon arrival, and you may find your way home from there. Goodbye, Julian." The audio feed cut off. The robotic voice returned, calm but deafening. "Asset transport commencing. Please remain seated and restrained." Julian was now frantic. He was shivering uncontrollably in the sudden Arctic blast, the massage seats physically punishing his back, and the knowledge of his complete financial and social annihilation crashing down on him. He beat uselessly on the door, but the lock was solid. Outside, the two burly security guards, having witnessed the entire scene via body camera feed relayed to the security chief, approached the Cadillac. They attached massive chains to the vehicle's front axle, linking it to a nondescript but powerful corporate flatbed truck that had been waiting out of sight. The truck began to move slowly, smoothly pulling the Cadillac, with Julian still trapped inside, across the manicured lawn. Julian, miserable and helpless, was given a forced, slow tour of the estate's perimeter, a final glimpse of the life he had so carelessly tossed away. As the truck turned onto the main internal drive toward the exit, Julian, shaking and in despair, saw the main mansion lights glowing warmly in the distance. He knew Serafina and Elias were likely watching this humiliating process unfold on a security feed inside, perhaps even sipping champagne while witnessing his final moments of downfall. The truck slowly approached the main gate. Julian prepared himself for the final walk of shame out into the city streets. The flatbed truck carrying the Cadillac finally reached the towering wrought-iron main gate of the Cedarwood estate. Julian, trapped inside the luxury sedan, was now shivering violently, the sub-zero air blasting from the vents making his teeth chatter uncontrollably, while the aggressive seat massage continued its relentless physical assault. The physical discomfort only amplified the mental anguish of his complete ruination. As the truck came to a gentle stop, the automatic gates swung open smoothly, granting the vehicle passage out onto the public road. The robotic voice, calm and utterly monotonous, cut through the violent chill. "Asset transport complete." Destination reached, doors unlatching now. The locks clicked open with a loud, welcome sound. Julian didn't wait. He lunged for the door handle and stumbled out of the car, collapsing onto the wet pavement outside the gate. He was dizzy, soaked, and freezing, gasping for the warm, muggy night air, which, despite the humidity, felt like a tropical relief compared to the Arctic blast inside the Cadillac. The flatbed truck immediately began to back up, maneuvering the empty, seized Cadillac off the street and out of sight. The towering iron gates of the Harrington property swung slowly shut once more, sealing Julian's fate and physically barricading him from his former life. Julian scrambled to his feet, wiping the rainwater and cold sweat from his face. He was alone, standing on a dark, unfamiliar street, far from any commercial area. He frantically searched his pockets for the $50 bill Elias had given him, finding it damp and crumpled. He had to get back to the apartment before Serafina's moving crew arrived, before 10 a.m., to save anything he could. He managed to flag down a worn, standard taxicab 30 minutes later after walking desperately toward the distant glow of streetlights. The cab driver, unimpressed by Julian's soggy designer clothes, was initially reluctant to take him until Julian produced the crumpled 50. When Julian finally arrived back at his apartment building, the hour was nearing 1 a.m. He burst into the unit, keys shaking in the lock. He found Veronica exactly where he had left her, still curled on the sofa, clutching her purse. She sprang up, not with concern, but with a fresh wave of panic. "Julian, the letter, you have to call a lawyer. We can sue for defamation. This is illegal termination." She cried, her voice regaining its shrill pitch. "Sue him with what, Mother? His lawyers are the ones who wrote the law." Julian roared, utterly defeated. "We have less than 9 hours. We need to pack. We need to get out of here. He wants us on the curb by 10 a.m. We have to find a storage unit, anything." The next few hours were a frantic, miserable blur. Julian and Veronica, two people accustomed to signing checks and delegating manual labor, were forced into the brutal reality of physical work. They threw clothes, shoes, and toiletries into trash bags and cardboard boxes, arguing bitterly over whose possessions were more valuable or necessary. Veronica kept trying to save her collection of gaudy costume jewelry, while Julian prioritized his custom suits and golf equipment, all of which were likely now useless to an unemployed man. As the first streaks of cold, gray dawn appeared outside the window, their energy was spent. They had managed to fill 24 boxes and 6 large garbage bags. Their rental home, which had been a haven of borrowed luxury, now looked like a disaster zone, stripped bare and smelling of desperation. Julian collapsed onto the bare, hardwood floor, resting his head against a packing box. "We need a truck, Mother, a rental truck, but I need a credit card and Serafina." "Call Arthur, your father," Veronica insisted. "He has to help us with this one final step." Julian, swallowing his pride for the last bitter time, called his father again. This time, Arthur answered immediately, his voice betraying a tired exasperation. "It's 6 a.m., Julian. What do you need?" Julian explained the looming deadline, the divorce notice, and the need for a truck and funds. "I will help you with the truck," Arthur conceded. "But you will repay me, every cent, when you find honest work. And I'm not driving up there. I'm sending my foreman, Marco, with the smallest pickup we own. He'll be there by 8 a.m. You are to load your possessions onto that truck and get out of that apartment. You are not to cause a scene. This is the last favor you get." At 8:05 a.m., the foreman, Marco, a man built like a barrel with a kind but weary face, arrived in a battered, small utility truck bearing the logo of Thorne Landscaping. Marco didn't ask questions. He simply handed Julian the keys to the back and a pair of worn work gloves. "Mr. Thorne said help you load. We have 2 hours," Marco said gruffly. Julian and Veronica worked with a desperate frenzy, hauling boxes and bags down the elevator and stacking them haphazardly into the back of the tiny pickup truck, all under the scrutinizing gaze of their now hostile neighbors who were enjoying their morning commute. At 9:55 a.m., Julian slammed the last box onto the pile. The truck was overflowing, the boxes precariously stacked. They looked up to see a massive, sleek moving van, bearing the logo of a high-end moving company, pull up to the building's loading dock. Stepping out of the van was a small, severe woman in a tailored suit, Serafina's personal administrative assistant, Ms. Clara Vance, the daughter of Elia's lawyer. She carried a clipboard and a stern, professional expression. Clara walked directly past Julian and Veronica, up to the main door. She looked at her watch, then back at Julian, who stood trembling beside the pitiful, overflowing pickup. "Mr. Thorne," Clara said, her voice dry and utterly dismissive. "It is 9:57 a.m. I see you have mostly complied. My team is here to retrieve the remaining assets of Mrs. Serafina Harrington Thorne. This is your final notice to vacate the property immediately. The remaining 3 minutes are yours." Julian didn't need to be told twice. He threw himself into the passenger seat of the tiny pickup truck, yelling at Marco to drive. Veronica scrambled into the center seat, pulling a trash bag full of her shoes onto her lap. The little pickup sputtered and pulled away from the curb, leaving the magnificent moving van and Clara Vance in its wake. As the pickup truck pulled onto the main city street, Julian looked back. Clara and the moving crew were already entering the apartment. He knew they were there not just to move furniture, but to change the locks, sanitize the space, and symbolically erase his presence. Just as they reached the busy intersection, Julian's phone, the one Elias had rendered useless, began to ring. It wasn't the phone itself, but a simple burner phone he had purchased with part of Elia's $50. He snatched it up. The call was from an unfamiliar number. He answered with a wary hello. "Julian, this is Serafina's bank. We're calling to confirm the sudden and complete closure of the joint account and the cancellation of the primary credit cards. We note that a final, large balance remains due for the last statement, which includes several $1,000s in charges for luxury items and travel that exceed the contractual limit." The phone line crackled as Julian's heart sank. He knew exactly what charges they meant: the designer clothes, the extravagant dinners, the expensive watch. He had spent his final days of entitlement ensuring he bought things he liked, assuming Serafina would cover the bill. Who is responsible for that balance now?" Julian asked, his voice a terrified whisper. "The account is closed. The balance has been transferred to a non-secured personal line of credit in your name, Julian Thorne, effective immediately. The collections process begins in 30 days. Have a pleasant day." The line clicked dead. Julian stared blankly out the window. Elias had not just terminated his income. He had saddled him with immediate, massive debt, strategically incurred in his name before the financial severing. This was more than revenge. It was economic crippling. He was now jobless, homeless, carless, and deeply in debt to his own wife's financial institutions, all while riding in the back of his father's struggling landscaping truck, heading into an uncertain future with his furious mother by his side. The small, battered pickup truck rattled and coughed as it drove further away from the glittering skyscrapers and affluent neighborhoods of the city, heading toward the modest suburban landscape where Julian's father, Arthur Thorne, maintained his struggling landscaping business. Julian stared out the window, his face a picture of utter despair, occasionally punctuated by fits of cold, self-pitying rage. Beside him, Veronica Thorne was not quiet or sympathetic. She had processed the shock of their eviction and the financial ruin, and her terror had crystallized into blistering, relentless blame directed entirely at her son. "This is your fault, Julian, your hubris, your massive, childish ego. If you had just left the car alone, if you hadn't opened your mouth in front of Elias, we would still have the apartment, the money, the status. You couldn't stand that your wife had something you didn't give her, and now look at us." Veronica shrieked, waving the trash bag full of her shoes wildly. "I am ruined. My club membership is pointless. My friends will laugh me out of the city." Julian finally snapped. He grabbed the bag of shoes from her lap and hurled it onto the floor of the truck cabin. "Stop it, Mother. Stop the hysterics. I did it for you. I did it because you spent 2 years nagging me about needing a car that matched your dignity. You pushed me to show off in front of your friends, and Elias saw it. He saw your greed reflected in me, and he knew I was not worthy of his daughter. The shouting match continued, two entitled people realizing, for the first time, that they were responsible for their own destruction. Marco, the foreman driving the truck, simply turned up the radio, his face impassive, having witnessed enough family melodrama over his years to know when to ignore it. They arrived at Arthur Thorne's property, a small, dilapidated industrial lot behind a faded hardware store. It was stark, practical, and devoid of any pretense of luxury. Arthur, a man whose face was etched with the stress of honest labor, stood waiting beside his own aging utility truck. Arthur didn't offer a hug or a word of welcome. He just pointed to a small, empty patch of gravel. "Park it there, Marco. Julian, empty the truck. That's where your belongings stay until you find a storage unit you can pay for." Julian stumbled out of the truck, his legs stiff and aching. "Father, I need a place to stay, just for a few nights. We have nowhere to go. Serafina locked us out." Arthur looked at his son, his eyes hard and disappointed. "My home is already full. But more importantly, my home is built on respect and honesty. You violated both. You can take a room at the extended stay motel 2 miles down the highway. I'll pay for the first 2 nights, the only financial safety net you'll receive from me. After that, you're on your own. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet without Elias Harrington's money supporting your bad habits." Veronica burst into tears, sinking dramatically onto one of the boxes. "A motel? Arthur, your son is ruined. We are the laughing stock of the city." "You worried about being laughed at? Try working 50 hours a week to keep a roof over your head, Veronica. That's dignity." Arthur walked away, leaving Julian to face the consequences alone. Julian spent the next 3 hours unloading his possessions into the gravel lot, a humiliating, final act of physical labor that cemented his loss of status. When he was done, he and his mother drove silently to the cheap motel, their world having shrunk from a luxury apartment to a small, stale-smelling room with peeling wallpaper. Meanwhile, back at the Cedarwood estate, Serafina was enjoying the bright morning sun filtering through her father's dining room windows. She was on a video call, finalizing the details of the new Rolls-Royce and discussing her immediate return to school. She had dropped out of her architecture program to marry Julian, a decision she now corrected with ruthless efficiency. Elias had pulled strings, and Serafina was re-enrolling for the fall semester at her top-choice university in Boston. She was leaving the city, leaving the mess, and leaving the memory of Julian Thorne behind. "The tickets are booked, darling," Evelyn, her mother, said, placing a hand gently on Serafina's arm. A private jet first thing Monday morning, a completely clean break. Serafina smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. "Thank you, Mother, and thank you, Father. You taught Julian a lesson, but you gave me back my life." Elias, looking out at the meticulously maintained lawns of his estate, nodded. "The Maybach was a property decision, Serafina, but the divorce and the severance, that was an investment in your happiness. The true lesson is this: an asset is only valuable if it performs its intended function and respects its owner. Julian did neither. You, my dear, are my most valuable asset. Now go build the magnificent life you deserve." That night, Serafina packed a single, elegant suitcase. She didn't mourn the loss of her marriage, only the years she had wasted. As she closed the case, her phone pinged with a final, strange notification. It was from her father's chief of security. Attached was a highly edited, crisp video clip, the one recorded from the security cameras at the west wall of the estate. The clip showed Julian, soaked and shivering, trapped inside the Cadillac, his face a mask of pure despair as the freezing air and violent massage seats assaulted him. The sound was crisp, Serafina's cold, calm voice delivering the final, surgical message of abandonment and financial ruin. Serafina watched the video once completely, taking in the full, unvarnished picture of Julian's complete downfall. She didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She felt a deep, quiet sense of justice and peace. She deleted the video immediately. The chapter was officially closed. She was free. Julian Thorne's life of entitled luxury had come to an abrupt, humiliating end, orchestrated by the quiet, terrifying power of the man whose daughter he had dismissed. He had lost everything, not to an accident or a betrayal, but to a measured, corporate-level response to his own fatal arrogance. He was left with nothing but debt, his mother's blame, and the cold, hard knowledge that he was utterly disposable. Serafina Harrington, meanwhile, was flying away to a new, magnificent future, unburdened and stronger than ever, proving that the real power in the family lay not in the expensive gifts, but in the unwavering pride and love of a dedicated father.